Thank you for joining us for this community conversation on housing in Chautauqua County. I'm WRFA Public Affairs Director Julia Ciesla-Hanley. When it comes to housing in Chautauqua County, it's not only old, but according to the 2020 census, over 30% is rental housing. And just how old is our housing here? Well, according to the 2000 census, over 76% of the housing stock was built before 1970. When the City of Jamestown held community input meetings last year on how to spend over $28 million in American Rescue Plan Act funds, housing issues were brought up repeatedly. With housing remaining a constant topic discussed at Jamestown City Council meetings and in the area, we want to bring in some folks together to talk about what is happening in the county. And while we don't have an in-person audience at this event, those watching online are invited to submit questions for our panel using the comments section. If time allows, I will then ask those questions, so please keep your questions brief. Also, this program is made possible through funding by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting's American Rescue Plan Act Stabilization Grant Fund. So we'll start with an introduction of our panelists here tonight. Hello, everyone. Starting over on my far right, we have Josiah Lamp, who has been on Community Conversations before. He is with Chautauqua Opportunities and the Director of Housing and Community Development. Next to him, we have Lisa Schmidtfrerick-Miller. She is with Chautauqua County Department of Health and Human Services as their Healthy Communities Consultant. And Brent Sheldon, to my immediate right, who is a member of the Jamestown City Council and is on the Housing Committee. So welcome again to everybody. We are going to start with Josiah for our first question. Everyone will have an opportunity to answer these questions. And so this first question is, what would you say the state of housing is in Jamestown and Chautauqua County?
Well, Julia, I think you hit the nail on the head when you say that our housing stock is old here in Chautauqua County. And just to reinforce that, the average date that housing was built in our county is 1953. And in Jamestown, it's 1939. So Jamestown even has an older housing stock than the county in general. And really, we have some of the oldest housing stock in New York State. So that presents some positives as well as some challenges. On the positive side, we have some really beautiful homes, some historic homes, some beautiful architecture. You can walk down certain streets, you can see a Victorian next to a colonial style home, next to a Tudor style home. And the beauty of that is unique to not just our area, but to you can go to many other parts of the country and you'll see large subdivisions of housing that all look the same. And I just think it adds to the quality of our life to have the diversity of different architectural styles that we have with our old housing. On the other hand, it does present some challenges with having old housing. The cost of repairs for old housing is greater, and we've seen too many homes become substandard or dilapidated because of the age that they have. So that's the housing stock itself. Also have to talk about affordability, because that usually a home is the largest financial cost for any household. And so whether it's your mortgage or it's rent, you have to add in the cost of repairs and maintenance as well as utilities. Those come out to a significant cost. And so for our community, which struggles with, in some cases, high poverty rates, we have a 28.5% poverty rate in Jamestown, maintaining housing can be a challenge. And many people don't have access to affordable housing. So that's one of the challenges that we have in housing. I'll also say that home ownership is something that at the county level, we have a 68.6% home ownership rate, which I think is more favorable, but in Jamestown, we have a 48%, so less than 50% home ownership rate in the city of Jamestown. So that, I think people who are living in a home that they own are a little bit more invested in the home and maintaining that, and so seeing home ownership rates increase would definitely improve the state of housing.
Thank you. Lisa, same question. What do you see as being some of the state of housing in Jamestown and Chautauqua County?
Well, I'd build a little bit on what Josiah mentioned with the, we really have a wonderful kind of diversity of housing styles here. We don't always have a diversity of housing that meets needs in the community. So for example, housing that is accessible to people with disabilities, or just that's age-friendly housing, I think is a little bit harder to come by, and I think that's definitely related to the age of the housing stock. Something that hopefully would change over time, but you need to have attention on that to encourage that kind of housing development as well. I would say, relative to many parts of the country, I think housing here is very affordable, even with the prices increases that the real estate market has seen recently. I think housing here remains very affordable. In some ways, that's a little bit of a plus and a minus because people can purchase homes and not always understand that it takes a lot to maintain those homes as well. And then, of course, I'm going to talk about the lead paint risk that comes with old housing stock. So lead paint was banned in 1978, and when we have so many homes in the community that are these built, before 1940, in the case of Jamestown, and before 1978 even, that there's a risk that there is lead paint in the home and a risk of lead poisoning that comes along with that, for sure. And I think, again, as Josiah mentioned, the increasing number of rentals is definitely we want to factor that into talking about housing and how that impacts housing in neighborhoods as well.
All right, thank you. And Brent, what would you see, I mean, obviously as being a Jamestown City Council member, your focus is really on Jamestown a lot, but from previous work experiences, which maybe you can share, what would you say was the state of housing in Jamestown and Chautauqua County?
Well, I'd have to agree with both Lisa and Josiah. We have very old housing stock. The city of Jamestown actually has some of the oldest housing stock in the country, not just New York State. And that has led to the county getting several lead grants to help remediate some of these problems in the past. And Jamestown has closer to 50% rental properties too. So that's another challenge that we have here. And we do have quite a few absentee landlords in the city of Jamestown, which leads to some problems. They don't have proper property managers. They're not taking care of their properties properly, which leads to challenges with our Department of Development and trying to enforce the code, making these properties livable and improve the quality of life for the tenants who live in these properties. It's a very big challenge that we have in the city of Jamestown. So we have a lot of work, but fortunately we have some new tools that I'd like to talk about down the road on some of these other questions.
Mm-hmm. And the next question we have is what are the biggest barriers to improving housing stock? And Brent, I'm going to stay with you because you started mentioning some of that. So what do you see as some of the barriers to improving the housing stock in our area?
Well, one is the poverty rate we have in the city of Jamestown. People just don't have the disposable income to spend on their properties. But fortunately, we do have grants that people can use through the city of Jamestown, through CRIC has had some in the past, CODE, and COI. So we have some grants available. Some of these grants, though, do have waiting lists, which is another barrier to getting some of these properties improved. But with the pandemic, we were fortunate enough to receive $28 million in ARPA money, American Rescue Plan Act money. And the City Council has designated approximately $1.5 million right now to improve properties in Jamestown, and not just rental properties, but homeowner properties, properties occupied by senior citizens. So we do have a couple new tools. We did have one grant program for people who had to repair water lines or sewer lines.
And roofs, yeah.
Right, and at this point, we've already gotten too many applications. We can't take any more applications. The program is closed. So there's a need out there.
Right. I was talking to City Director of Development, Crystal Surdick, and she mentioned that I think 130 applicants came in, and the amount of funding that was available would only cover about 30 houses. Yeah. So yeah, it was a huge need, or at least desire for assistance in the city. Mm-hmm. So yeah, right. You mentioned COI, and I want to go to Josiah to continue answering the question. So about barriers to improving housing stock, and what can COI, what is their role in all that too?
Well, the barriers, on one level, there is a huge financial barrier that goes beyond what any of these grant programs can do. I think what we can do helps, but when you look at where properties should be to meet code and where so many of them are, the amount of money that is needed to be invested in those properties to bring them up to code, or at least to the standards that most would be considered standard, is very significant. And so that's why these resources, even $28 million, is not nearly enough to address the full amount of the housing issues that we have in Jamestown or in the county. And so, we need to work both with the grants and the public resources, as well as working with private landlords and homeowners to try to leverage both those sides so that we can address the full scope of the issue. Housing is an economic development issue in this sense, and so working in that sense, I think we can make an improvement. Part of that is increasing our home ownership rate. As I said earlier, Homeowners are more invested in their own property. They don't just invest because they see a return on an investment. They invest because they love their home, and they want to see their home be the best standard as possible. And so helping more people have access to home ownership, I think, is an economic development strategy that's important. And helping to see home values rise overall. We have seen a rise in home values lately, but I think the more people look at their home as an asset that will retain its value, I think the more people are going to be willing to put money into it. So there are other programs. I'll mention one that COI, in partnership with Chautauqua County, are working on right now, which is our lead abatement program. That's a $3 million grant from HUD, and we're working with up to 140 homes in Chautauqua County with a focus on Jamestown, and to invest in abating lead in those homes. So that could be replacing windows or doors or painting different surfaces to try to reduce the risk of lead, especially for children under the age of 6. But some of the projects that we've been doing, they're from $20,000 to $60,000. Which in some cases is more than the value of the home itself. So you see the level of need by what we're doing with those projects.
Definitely, indeed. Yeah, I had no idea it could get even that expensive. And yeah, you're right. It's like I think about value of homes, at least when I was in the market and buying a couple of years ago, and it was easy to find a house under $60,000, and that was pretty decent shape even. So to think about having a lead abatement situation where it could cost that much that's mind blowing. And Lisa, I mean, you're obviously working on that with COI, and I mean, you and I have talked about lead in the past. So other than lead prevention, but you can talk more about that too. What do you see as some of the biggest barriers to improving the housing stock?
Well, I think, as Josiah referenced, and Brent, when we have $28 million in ARPA money and we've designated $1.5 million to housing, and the fact that the allocation for the roofing program has gone so quickly really points to the need, and also, is designating that much money to housing enough? And I guess I would ask Brent that, like, how do you feel about that as a city council member?
Well, some of these programs, it's a start. We are looking at some other programs to add on to have more money available. But the city has a lot of needs, a lot of things have been neglected, including infrastructure. So we will be doing more. It's a start. We haven't fully allocated the $28 million at this point in time.
So I think it's great that there's the response that there has been to those kind of programs, and then the response that we're seeing to the lead program as well. People recognizing this as an opportunity to make their home safer for children, I think is really important. But to get back to kind of the barriers to improving housing stock, I think the sheer volume of need feels overwhelming, and we have to start somewhere. We are starting, all of us, in the work that we're doing, are starting to make those dents. I think the workforce issues are another barrier to improving housing stock here, and again, that's something that stakeholders are starting to talk about and bring people together to address those issues and looking at models from other communities that have been successful in increasing the workforce capacity to do the kind of work that we have the money for, because we can get more of this kind of, more HUD grants, we can get more funding. We have to have people to do that work as well. And then I think another barrier is just that the legal mechanisms that are in place, they're difficult to work with. So the legal mechanisms that we might try to use when we have problem properties in the community they're cumbersome, and they take a long time, and sometimes they're not terribly effective. That's an issue that is a little bit peripheral to the work that I do. Certainly something that I think Crystal Surdick, Director of Development, could talk at length more about, but definitely a barrier that we have seen as well. And finally, just the political will. And we've been dealing with, just in the lead paint world for a long time, we've been dealing with lead-poisoned children here, and lead poisoning is 100% preventable. And where's the will to change that, to make the housing stock safer for kids?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think you said it was 1978 is when the law
paint was banned.
And that's, we're getting very close. I mean, we're still more than several years out, but when you're talking about being nearly 50 years since that's happened, and how many housing structures still have lead paint in it, or most likely do, because people painted over them. And when you think about children, I always say, look at what any child under the age of 6, or maybe even some older than that, what they are willing to put in their mouth. So yeah, and you can automatically, you can really see very fast how lead paint can be a big concern.
Well, and the problem with the older housing stock, I think a lot of people think of lead paint, or the lead paint as an issue of the past, but as these homes continue to deteriorate, the risk increases. So the more we have leaky roofs that are, accelerating deterioration of painted surfaces, the more there's just wear and tear on painted surfaces, the more lead is being released. So it's not a problem that's going away unless we start doing something about it.
And to something that Lisa, you asked Brent about, I did catch a preview of the pre-file for the city council meeting that's coming up on Monday, July 18th. It looks like there's going to be several resolutions that may be looking at adding more monies to housing. So Brent, if you haven't seen that, you will see that shortly. So unfortunately, I will not be at the meeting, but anybody who's watching, I think if you are interested in learning more about what's happening with the ARPA money, they will be discussing more.
More to come, yes.
More to come for sure. So Lisa, I'm going to stay with you because you were talking about different things that you're trying to do in regards to not just lead paint abatement, but also trying to bring people in. So what are some of the other things that your agency, or I should say Chautauqua County, or what you're doing within grant programs to help with housing?
So Chautauqua County took the lead on writing the HUD lead hazard control grant that Josiah referenced, and that's the $3 million in funding. And like I said, there's more of that available, and I'm expecting we'll be very successful with this round of funding and be a strong applicant to get even more funds down the road. So we have that HUD money. We also have recently applied for $2 million in HUD Healthy Homes. It's called a Healthy Homes Production Grant that is in cooperation with the City of Jamestown. So collaboration with Chautauqua Opportunities on the lead, with the City of Jamestown primarily on the Healthy Homes funding. That's broader money. That is money that can go toward pests, radon, moisture, mold issues, fall hazards for seniors in the community, and the requirements to participate in the program are broader. So homes with a child under 18 or with an adult over 62 could be eligible for that. And again, it's another example of we're kind of purposely starting small on that to try to build the capacity and then to be able to get more money down the road. So that has been two of kind of the large money issues, but we also have a lead poisoning prevention program at the county. We can do a risk assessment. Brent's very familiar with this program because he was one of our risk assessors. We can do a risk assessment in any home where there's a child under 6, at least 6 hours a week at no charge to the homeowner. If we find lead, then we try to connect the homeowner with the resources to fix it. We can provide some of those resources through that program as well. We also are required to do lead risk assessment any place. We need to try to, if we have a lead poisoned child, which we have over 80 yearly in the county, but we need to find the source of the lead, and we have staff that do that same risk assessment. They'll go into homes and try to do that. And then finally, I think, we're doing some new partnerships with code enforcement in the city of Jamestown and elsewhere across the county to address some of the housing conditions that are a public health risk, not just with the lead, but it could be unsanitary conditions kind of issues. And then the health department at Chautauqua County is supporting, with some of the HUD funds and with some of the lead poisoning prevention funds, supporting a healthy housing coalition that we started and met initially as a healthy housing task force in 2018 and has evolved into the Healthy Housing Coalition.
And is COI part of that Healthy Housing Coalition?
We are, yes.
So, okay, so Josiah, I think I'm going to go to you next and ask about what COI is doing to help with housing, and maybe if you could talk about the Healthy Housing Coalition too, in terms of who's on that and what that group is doing.
Yeah, COI is one of the groups who's been a part of that group for a long time, and we continue to see it evolve. We're becoming a more formal organization, and we continue to look for new funding. The HUD grant was one of the first fruits of that partnership, and we were able to get that 2 years ago, a $3 million grant that COI works with Chautauqua County on. we'll be looking for more resources, and we're looking to try to increase our advocacy for healthy homes initiatives and lead-based paint initiatives here locally, raise awareness on the risks of lead paint. I think a lot of people don't understand just how serious lead paint poisoning can be for children, and I think that's a message that needs to get out in our community as well. So that's one of the things that COI is doing here in the county. We also are working with homelessness, and right now, I should have mentioned earlier, but we are really seeing a surge in homelessness in Chautauqua County and Jamestown. In the first 6 months of this year, we've had 965 people who have come in for homeless services, and that's usually what we have in a year. So we're on track for doubling our amount of homelessness in our county in this past year. A big part of that is that we had been under an eviction moratorium that was lifted in January. So many people are going through evictions right now. But those of us who are working with the homeless are seeing a lot of people who are in dire situations, and the severity of needs are going up. Our work there is to help people find new housing and help them with first month rent or ongoing rent in their new housing to become more stable. We also are working on the Chautauqua Women's Shelter, which is a new shelter opportunity that will be built in 2023, because right now many people who are homeless are living in motels, which is not the best situation to provide. We're not able to provide the same level of services to somebody when they're living in a motel, and so we really do need some new shelter options here in Chautauqua County, especially for women. So we're excited about that project, still in the works and coming in 2023.
Right, and when you presented about that in February to Jamestown City Council, I think that was right after the eviction moratorium had ended, and I think I remember you saying then that you had seen over 200 maybe it was just under 300 people who were homeless or were newly homeless at that point in time, and we were, I think, shocked by that number.
But what's gone up since then?
It's gone up quite a bit. So, yeah, wow, and thinking of other places that are working on alternative housing, we just had in the news this morning about that the Gateway Lost, which is another, I think, was a low income and also transitional kind of housing that they're going to be working on. That project may still go forward as long as they get their financing in 2023 as well. So I guess next year we'll have to regroup and see where we all are at with the different kinds of housing that we have. Granted, because obviously we're talking a lot about home ownership right now and people dealing with home issues, but there is the other side of that as well with people who are renting or don't have a home at all. So, Brent, going to you, in terms of what you're doing with City Council and with the City of Jamestown, we've talked about some of the programs already, but what is the city doing in terms of helping with the housing situation?
Well, I'll talk about the two most recent programs that we approved in June. One is the Residential Home Improvement Incentive Program, where interior exterior renovations to homes which are owner-occupied, that contain 3 or less units can apply, where you can do renovations up to $40,000 plus and receive approximately 10% of a cash rebate for the project that you did. And this could include painting, siding, roofs, fences, additions to living spaces, garages, decks or porches, kitchen remodels, and electrical and plumbing improvements. And the other program is Senior Citizen Housing Improvement Incentive Program. This one is income-based here, that you own or live in your own home for more than a year and your total income, including Social Security, is less than or equal to $22,000 for county tax or $19,000 for city and school tax. And you can get up to $10,000 in documented repairs or improvements that would receive a dollar-for-dollar rebate check. So that's for senior citizens, which we know a lot of them are living on fixed incomes, don't have a lot of money to spend on housing improvements, but if they could get help from one of their children, maybe get a gift from them, they would get a dollar-for-dollar match with that program. So those are the two, and it's the same type of repairs that I mentioned before: painting, siding, roofs, fences, et cetera. So those are the two of the newest programs that we have approved, and we do have other programs that we'll be talking about here in the very near future, probably approving some on Monday, well, end of the month anyway.
End of the month, yeah. And so those two programs, I think those were different in that those are being run through the city's assessor's office.
Correct, right,
Yeah.
because, some of these projects could increase the assessment on the property, and we do have a waiver program too on some of these as well. They won't be getting a tax increase if they do the improvements. Mm-hmm. And that's been another disincentive to some people, thinking that if they improve their properties, their taxes are going to go up. So
Right.
there are some programs that we have that can alleviate that, and they won't get a tax increase.
Yeah, and that was something I never thought about, as a homeowner myself. I always thought, well, I need to do this work. I guess I didn't always think about the assessment, but some people, that is a concern to them because of wherever their income level is, they might be stretched already. So when it comes to challenges for those wanting to become homeowners in Chautauqua County, what are some of these challenges that you would see? And Josiah, I'll start with you on that.
So traditionally, I would say, credit history or credit score is one challenge, and then lack of money for down payment would be the main barriers. I think, sort of the kicker here in Chautauqua County is if you're a renter, you look at how much people are paying in their average rent and how much people are paying in mortgage on a starter home. Mm-hmm. Actually, people who are homeowners usually are, or at least if they're in a starter home, are paying less. And so if we can help more people who are renters become homeowners, they actually may be reducing their monthly costs. But the barrier is that down payment and the upfront cost of homeownership. And so, there are some programs that are out there that can help with that, and we want to connect people to those programs for down payment assistance, closing cost assistance. I would also say that in the current market, the cost of housing is quite a bit higher than it has been. I don't want to say it's unaffordable, because when you look at other parts of the country, we're still relatively affordable, but it has gone up. It's become more of a barrier, and also the availability of housing is hard to find the kind of home that everybody wants and is looking for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I've seen that you could say our housing, what we pay for housing is very reasonable here, but I don't know how, and I haven't seen the numbers on how that compares to salaries and wages, if those have gone up equally or if there's, still that gap between. Mm-hmm. So, Lisa, we'll go to you next on that question. So what are some of the challenges you're seeing for those wanting to become homeowners in the county?
Well, I would echo what Josiah said about that, some of the barriers to entry to home ownership that are so high. And, we know people in poverty and people trying to get out of poverty, it's difficult to establish like the banking relationships and the credit, to get the credit that you would need to get a traditional mortgage and that sort of thing. So helping people to overcome some of those barriers, I think, is really critical. And there are programs, there may be not enough programs, but the idea of connecting people better to those programs, I think, is important. And there's some neat ideas out there about mentoring, really kind of one-on-one sort of mentoring people through this process, because it is a process, and it's you're right, people are paying more in rent in many cases than they would be paying for a mortgage. But going back to what I mentioned earlier, there are costs associated with home ownership that you get these unexpected sort of expenses in that too. So there's a little bit of a balance there, and how to make sure people have the means to be able to maintain the homes that they buy as well. I would say another challenge for people looking to become homeowners is obviously there are maintenance issues with the existing housing stock that are here that people may not want to deal with. And interesting, we are starting to see more people ask about lead paint in homes, whether it's just increased awareness locally or people coming from other areas that are aware of lead paint risks, wanting to have homes tested before they're purchased. And we tell people don't let that be a barrier. I mean, lead paint is manageable, and there's programs to help people to take care of it, but that can be daunting to people. So just knowing that there are resources out there, we have free classes to make sure that people, if they're doing their own work, can keep themselves and their families safe too. I would say other challenges, I know having looked for homes a couple times in the past couple of years, that the housing market is still strong, and I think it's just challenging for people to try to get those homes, especially first-time home buyers, entry-level homes, getting into homes at a price point, a decent house at a price point that's affordable given the wage rates in the area too. So.
Yeah, and Lisa, we do offer a home buyer education class at COI, and one of the things that we always recommend is that people have their property inspected, both for potential lead issues, but all of those repairs that people may not be aware of when they're going to buy a home. That's part of the costs of the home. So becoming educated on the full cost of the home and being able to afford the full cost of the home before you make that purchase.
Right, and even at any price point, I think houses were going so quickly for a while that people didn't have time to get inspections. I think that's starting to settle down a little bit, but in some ways, a good problem to have a strong housing market, but it definitely makes it challenging for some folks.
Right. And I was hearing from people who are realtors and saying that it was to the benefit of the buyer to say, I'm not going to do an inspection, and that then the person that was selling the house said, well, great, I'll sell to you then.
Yeah.
And then that buyer comes in and doesn't know what they're getting into.
Yeah,
Exactly.
Yep.
Wow. Brent, so what do you see as some of the challenges to becoming a homeowner in Chautauqua County and Jamestown?
I think Lisa and Josiah have covered it pretty well. I was going to add, you should have a home inspection done to try to, find out if there are some problems like that too. But I really don't think I can add much to that at this point.
Great. So moving on to the next question, we were wondering, we've talked a lot about home ownership, but we're going to move over to the rental side and also some other things that are not related to rentals, but maybe we call zombie property. So what are some of the solutions for dealing with either absentee landlords who are not taking care of properties or zombie properties where someone had lived there and now it's just empty? Maybe it's owned by a bank. And Lisa, I don't know if this is in your wheelhouse so much, but I'm going to start with you on this one.
And I was going to suggest starting with Brent because I think.
Right? Well, we can do that. We're free. We're not beholden to start. So, Brent, do you want to take on this question first?
Sure, yeah. We do have an attorney working for the city who is handling a lot of the zombie properties in the city of Jamestown, dealing with the banks. We have taken possession of a couple of these properties as well and lots. So we are working towards that. It is challenging, but they're seeing this issue more and more throughout New York State, especially with the pandemic and people not paying their mortgage payments and being foreclosed and that. So it's something that we're working on. But also we're looking at, some of the nuisance properties, vacant properties, and possibly even a rental inspection ordinance. I do have 3 ordinances that the Housing Committee is going to start talking about that were presented to us by the Department of Development to try to combat some of these problems. As we know, there's absentee landlords all throughout the area. In the past, we had a large number of landlords who lived in Australia who found that Jamestown was a very reasonable place to invest in a property and make a lot of money on the rental properties. They could buy these houses very cheap, in like the low $20,000, make tons of money on rent, and then invest into their properties. So it's just crazy. A lot of these did have lead paint that when I was working for the county health department, had to deal with a property manager, and a lot of times, we would get the bare minimum done on, trying to correct these lead issues. So we're going to, we have to work together as a council. We have to approve some of these ordinances. There might be some changes to them, but we need to strengthen our housing laws here to try to improve the housing stock in the city of Jamestown.
Mm-hmm. When it comes to the new ordinances that Department of Development is giving you, do you anticipate those will be discussed at the work session, your committee work session on Monday?
I'm not sure. I didn't see the agenda, but I think so because Crystal asked that any comments be given to her by the end of June. So,
Okay.
So I think that we could definitely be talking about these on Monday.
Right, and I apologize to listeners. I'm not sure if that meeting will be at 6:30 or 6:45 on Monday the 18th, but that information should be on the city's website at jamestowny.gov.
Right. There was possibly a change of venue. I don't know if you saw that on the thing.
I think they were still planning on meeting in City Hall on Monday. I did see that part.
Yeah, because we're trying to have more meetings
yeah.
in the community, and there was talk that we could be having it at a church in the second ward this week.
Okay.
But.
Yeah, I think they're still in City Hall on the 18th.
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Did you have anything else you want to add on? Or?
No, not at this
Okay.
point. Yeah.
All right, Josiah, I'm going to go to you. I'm going to, since Lisa wanted to defer, I'm going to skip Lisa and go to you for solutions for dealing with absentee landlords and zombie properties. What are some of the things that maybe you see that could possibly work or that you've seen happen that have been successful in other communities?
I mean, we're talking about a couple different types of situations here that need different strategies. Zombie properties, actually in 2016, New York State put in a new law that requires zombie properties to be registered in a state database, and there's some rules that go with it, but banks who fail to comply have fines up to $500 a day. And since that time, we've seen that properties have moved through that process, foreclosure process, much quicker. And so that law has had an effect, a positive effect across the state when you look at the data across the state. So I think that's encouraging to say that what's going on locally with a possible new ordinance could really have a long-term net positive effect on our community. We do need some of that locally. The issues that we have that an ordinance would affect are not the zombie property so much, but the absentee landlords, as Brent mentioned. So that's a slightly different issue. And then I think also we have to talk about properties that are in tax foreclosure, because we have a significant amount of our properties that are part of the tax auction. And you know, that's going on right now, actually. But there isn't an inspection, or there isn't really a good condition analysis of the properties that go up for tax auction. And so there's a lot of speculation on properties because people don't have the information, enough information when they purchase it. So sometimes people will buy it, and then after the fact, they drop out of the process, or even worse, they buy it and then they don't do the repairs that are necessary in order to bring those properties up to the right condition. And so we need to really look at that tax auction process to see if there can be more transparency in terms of the condition of the properties made available to those who are purchasing, so that they can make better informed decisions and we don't have as much speculation in that process.
Well, in follow-up to the properties, once they're purchased, that there's some inspection done after the fact, a year later. Is there progress being made on these, on existing code violations? Is the property, does it appear that work is being done on the property? Is it being maintained? I had the opportunity to do a ride-along with code enforcement in the city of Jamestown, and just, a couple of houses that I learned more about in this process. One of them was purchased for $70 at auction. In the last auction was 2019, right?
Yes.
Yeah, 2019 it was purchased for $70. And despite the low purchase price, the purchaser really didn't have the means to take care of the existing problem. I mean, the house was already probably pretty far gone, made a couple of attempts to fix a couple of things in the home, and ultimately just gave up. So now you have a vacant property that clearly had been broken into more than once. It's sometimes difficult to really secure properties the way they should be secured, but property had been broken into. Anything that was left was taken or destroyed. And most recently, there's, I'm not kidding, an entire yard full of garbage in the back. So now creating a health and safety risk for neighboring properties as well. And the property is condemned. And what I think people need to realize is that there's a huge cost to this. So it's not just somebody bought a property and just let it go back for taxes, but the public safety risks to that. You're providing a haven for illicit activity. There's a danger in people entering houses like that. And now somebody's going to have to pay for that demolition, whether it's through city, county, whatever, but taxpayers are paying for that demolition. Taxpayers are going to have to pay for the cleanup of all of the garbage that's on the property. And we see that, I think, time and time again in this community. And I think that's an example of where we need to appreciate what it's really costing us to not be more aggressive in insisting that property owners maintain their properties.
Mm-hmm. When it comes to the tax auction, I don't know that the process for the tax auction varies very much across the nation. Maybe I'm wrong, but have any of you heard of a municipality or a county that has, when they do these tax auctions, that has put into place any procedures to prevent the exact thing you just described, that Lisa just described?
I'm interested. I'm not really familiar with any. I think.
Yeah, I know that they do list code violations now if they have been documented by the municipality. They will give that information to the people who are looking at buying these properties on the auction. So they've got that information. And then, of course, the municipalities will follow up with those afterwards and then make sure that those things get corrected before they're occupied, before they give them a certificate of occupancy. But one other thing, though, that we haven't really touched on is one solution would be a stronger housing court in the city of Jamestown. We've had just, part of the thing was the eviction moratorium that we had. A lot of landlords weren't getting paid their rent. There were some programs that would help them recoup some of their money, but the tenants had to cooperate with them, and that was difficult for some of the tenants, or the landlords to get that information. And then some of the violations, the judge kept granting continuances, that you've got more time to do this when they've had, like some cases, 3 years to do the work, and it's still not getting corrected. So we need to have a stronger judge to advocate for the housing, to get the housing up to code, and make it livable for the people of Jamestown. We just can't keep living in the past here.
Right, and I think one of the part of the issues with the housing court is that the housing court even wasn't operating during the pandemic for a time period, which that was set by, not here in Jamestown so much.
The
state.
state courts, yeah.
So then you have like that trickle-down effect where one of your tools they could use to help with housing has been, you don't have the control over it, whether or not it was in session, quite literally.
Right.
So,
right. It was considered a low priority by the states for the courts to be run in the state. Of course, the criminal court is high and family court, but then housing court just
So,
wasn't a priority.
I mean, you referenced it a little bit, but some states, New Jersey most recently, many communities across the country have certificate of occupancy standards for rental housing. And, really what we call proactive rental inspections is, I really believe, the only way that we're going to stop kind of the slide and decline of housing. And even, when you mentioned they put the code violations in the auction, it's only the code violations they know about. And code has a very difficult time getting to the interior of homes. And when they do, it's usually really, really bad. And proactive rental inspections are really just designed to make sure that places meet basic safety and health standards, basic safety and health standards. But it allows, it's more eyes on those property, and rental housing is a business, whether you're, renting one unit upstairs from your own home or you have a portfolio of 400 units, it's a business. And we regulate hotel rooms and restaurants, and there's no reason not to make sure that the housing stock is minimally safe for the people that are living there. It's the only thing that's driven down lead poisoning rates in communities, Rochester most significantly, but it was when they put in place a proactive rental inspection and specifically addressing the lead paint issue that they saw their lead poisoning rates drop by over 80%.
My goodness.
So that is significant. And I think we have to have enforcement as another issue, and it has to be fair. We have so many programs right now between all the city programs and then the ongoing CDBG monies and homes monies and the HUD monies that that we currently have in place. Like, we have great resources to help property owners to take better care of their properties. But we need to have some sticks, and we need to have some teeth to the enforcement, I think, to make that happen.
So, moving on to our last question. This will be our last question before we open up the conversation to audience questions. So if you are listening and you have a question regarding housing for this panel, you can submit that in the comment section. If you're watching on Facebook, there is a comment section. You can leave it there. Or if you are watching on YouTube, you can also submit it there as well. So this last question before we go to audience questions is, and this is one I kept thinking I want to ask this, and I forgot it was on my list, is where can people find more information? I mean, all three of you have talked about variety of programs and the wealth of programs that are out there. So where can people find more information, either about programs that are available to them or information about housing resources? And Lisa, we'll start with you.
I think locally, I know our own health department webpage has quite a few resources relating to the lead paint issue, for sure. So if somebody went to chqgov.com and searched under lead poisoning, and that actually links over to Josiah's program. But I would also encourage people to look at national kind of level resources like the National Center for Healthy Housing, which is nchh.org, simple but has a lot of good information, resources, fact sheets, and so on and so forth around healthy housing, and other housing related agencies. EPA has a lot of that information as well. And somebody can always contact myself, or our program director is Anna Powell, and her number is 753-4764, and she's at our lead program coordinator, kind of our housing director at the health department.
Josiah?
Well, certainly Chautauqua Opportunities programs can be found at www.chautauquaopportunities.com, and we have a section on housing specifically that could be a resource for our programs. But I want to go a little different direction here and talk about a book that I've read this year that really made an impact on me. And it's a book called Made by Stephanie Land, and it's a memoir of a single mom who grew up in poverty, was living and trying to work her way out of poverty. And when I read that book, I realized it's about housing. It's about homelessness. It's partially about domestic violence. It's about health and the intersection between health issues and housing. And it's about, it's an incredible story of her pursuit to get out of poverty and the challenges that she faces and the way that she overcame them. So I just want to recommend Made. It's also been made into a Netflix series, which I haven't seen the whole series, so I can't recommend that, but I love the book.
Is Made spelled M-A-D-E or M-A-I-D?
M-A-I-D.
Okay, great. So, and is there a phone number that people can call for Chautauqua Opportunities as well, if they're more comfortable doing that?
Sure. 716-661-9430 is our Jamestown office, and 716-366-8176 is our Dunkirk office.
Great. And Brent, where can people find more information about things that the city has to offer?
They can go to the City of Jamestown's website. It's www.jamestownny.gov. There's links on there to Department of Development for the different grants that they have, the home and CDBG grants, some of the ARPA funding. Also, they can contact the assessor's office for the 2 latest grants that we've approved. Their phone number is 483-7510, and there's phone numbers in there for the Department of Development on the website as well.
Great, great. So we do have one audience question that we've gotten in so far, and I'll leave it to whoever wants to answer this question first. So the question has to do with what resources do renters have when dealing with an absentee landlord who refuses to do improvements on the home, leading it to be condemned, and the renters being evicted and having to find a new home, even though it was not their fault. So I'm not sure. I think, Josiah, you were nodding your head. Is this something you want to take on?
Yes, yeah. COI, we do have resources for that type of situation, but the place to start would be to go to the Department of Social Services and to put an application there. We work very closely with them, and they would make the referral over for help with, in this case, it wouldn't be eviction prevention because they probably cannot stay in that property, but help with finding a new property and paying for some of the costs with moving in and ongoing rent in the new property. That's on the housing side. Also on the legal side, Law New York is a great resource for people who are facing eviction.
Mm-hmm. And Law New York being, for people who are wondering, they are located on East 3rd Street in downtown Jamestown, kind of by like East 3rd Street and Spring Street. I apologize, I don't know the number off the top of my head, but they are located here downtown.
Across from the Red Gillette.
Yes, right across from our offices here. So, I mean, Brent, do you have any other insight for, when it comes to if this was happening in the city, does it make sense for if someone's looking for information, should they contact DOD, Department of Development?
Well, if they have housing issues, that they should contact Department of Development. If there's things that that can be corrected inside their apartment, it's sometimes they're worried. If they get a housing inspector in there, it could get the property condemned. They could be forced to move. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of a slippery slope. So it's hard to find a balance for that. I mean, the city really doesn't have the resources to help these people find a new residence. As Josiah mentioned, the Chautauqua County Department of Services can do that. And it's difficult. landlords have rights, tenants have rights, but we're trying to make the housing safe for everybody and improve the housing stock in Jamestown.
Right. Yeah, and I'm thinking with this particular question, where it seems like it's a case of a landlord refusing to do improvements on a home, and I don't have data on it to know how often this happens, where they just say, nope, we're not going to do it, and we're just going to allow this house to be condemned.
Can I share a story with you?
Sure.
About that? Because one of the other properties that I learned quite a bit about was a property that was owned by an Australian who purchased the property about 12 years ago, has owned it for 12 years, and by all appearances put $0 into the property. And I learned that the property, it's a 2-unit, was rented up until March of this year when it was condemned. So just doing a little loose math, kind of figured out that that property owner in Australia took in well over $100,000 in rent during that time, put no money into that property whatsoever, did not pay the taxes, cheated the city out of their taxes for the last 3 years or 4 years, whatever it was. I don't know how I would feel as a tenant who's been paying my rent and find out that my landlord hasn't been paying the taxes, and never mind, not putting any money into fixing the property. So the property is now condemned. The people, whoever was living there, had to leave. The property owner has walked away. The property's in the auction right now. And and that money has left the city of Jamestown. I mean, I think that's, when we get to talking about home ownership, those are people who are living here and spending their money here. And when we talk about responsible landlords, they're providing housing and they're spending their money here. But when we have situations like that, it's somebody who took advantage of this community and the lack of attention to housing in this community and walked away with, probably after the taxes that were paid and a few dollars to the property management, quote, management that was in place, walked away with probably $90,000.
Yeah.
That's an extractive model of business that really harms our community, extracting wealth from here. And I think who it also hurts, not just the tenant, but it also hurts the responsible landlords in our community who have properties down the street from that property and who are doing everything they can to maintain them at the property, at the value that they are.
Yep, I agree. And bringing down property values all around that property. Yep. And it is. And I think, I just can't emphasize enough that this costs all of us, whether you live in the city of Jamestown or you live, as I do, outside of the city. It's taxpayers all around. And just to reference where we are with the city's housing stock, the city of Jamestown is 22% of the population of Chautauqua County. The city of Jamestown is home to 70% of the lead-poisoned children in this county. That's a huge, huge disparity. I mean, and that really points to, like I said, the condition of the housing stock. And what Josiah mentioned was right. I mean, housing is a fundamental social determinant of health. And kids that are living in substandard housing are struggling in school. We had a case with a child with asthma when that child was missing school in the nurse's office. When the family ended up moving out of the home, problem just eliminated. Child back in school, child healthy again, able to learn. And that's repeated time and time and time again.
Mm-hmm. We talk a lot about how there's no silver bullets and how there are so many things that you need to do to combat issues within a community, and how you can fix housing, and that's not the silver bullet. But in the example you just gave right there, you fix lead paint in a home with the children who's having issues because of lead paint, and then they do better in school, and how that does have a domino effect in a positive way. But it goes just the other way too.
Yeah.
And
and to be clear, that's not lead paint. That was an asthma issue.
Okay.
Because unfortunately, lead paint's damage is permanent. So those children will suffer learning deficits the rest of their lives.
Right. And lead paint can lower a child's IQ, which affects their learning processes, and down the road it can affect their income levels too. They might have to be in a low-paying job because they couldn't educate themselves. They couldn't go on to further their education. So then there's also social services costs that may be involved. So the cost of a child being lead poisoned, it just gets astronomical down the road.
Wow. So another thing, we didn't discuss this in our questioning, that didn't come up, is with older housing, we also see a lot of asbestos. And does anyone have any experience for what people can do to deal with asbestos in their house? I've been generally told that if you leave it alone, it's fine. But if someone is looking, I mean, it can be anywhere from being in either floor tiles to wrapped around pipes and all that. What in your experiences, and you just open to anyone who wants to answer this one first, so what should people do when it comes to asbestos in their house?
I would say leave it alone. Call a professional if you want to have it removed. We see when the city has to go to demolish a house, they have to have an asbestos survey done. And if they do find asbestos tiles, it's costly to take it out, even before they demolish the house, because they can't just demolish the house and have those asbestos fibers going in the air in the neighborhood. So it's best to call a professional. They can do air monitoring to see if there are asbestos fibers in the air. Covering over floor tiles is a good thing, because you're kind of encapsulating those, or encapsulating and covering up the old pipework and the old octopus-type furnaces, notorious for having asbestos.
It's relatively inexpensive to test. I had asbestos floor tiles with some asbestos in them, and I had those tested, and it was relatively easy process to do that. And I encapsulated it. It was the easiest and lowest cost method.
In another health risk in our community is radon, and we have a high percentage of, I think our geography here, we have a high percentage of homes that have radon in the basements, and that's not as expensive to treat. It's just there's the radon mitigation systems that can be installed, and so working with a contractor who knows how to do that, that's something that can help. Radon is a gas that comes in through basements mainly, and it is the second leading cause of lung cancer.
Wow. Yep. Good information to have. And before I don't have any other questions, but I just want to reinforce for the listeners. So if we can start with Josiah and then go down the line, can you tell us again website and phone number people can call to reach your agency? So
Chautauqua Opportunities, and our website is www.chautauquaopportunities.com. You can call us in Jamestown at 716-661-9430.
And Lisa?
And the Chautauqua County Department of Health and Human Services, the Environmental Health Program, Anna Powell is at 716-753-4764. My role as coordinator of the Healthy Housing Coalition, if anybody's interested in participating and joining us in that coalition, I can be reached at 716-969-2542.
And Brent for City of Jamestown?
City of Jamestown website, www.jamestownny.gov. Links to the Department of Development, and phone number for the assessor is 483-7510 for the two new programs that we have.
Okay, great. Well, I want to thank all three of you again for participating on this panel with us. When it comes to housing, I think we barely scratched the surface, but at least we get a start. We hopefully will continue maybe next year with another continuing the discussion. I also want to thank all our audience members who have tuned in. You will be able to view this presentation again online for free on our Facebook page, YouTube channel, and on WRFALP.com. We'll be re-airing this program again on Community Matters as well in the coming weeks. So on behalf of WRFA, the Reg Lene Center for the Arts team, and Cranky Play Productions, thank you for being with us tonight.